Welcome to the Hundredth Monkey Radio with Tom, Jake, and Greg today. We have Jake and Greg, who are Jake's my nephew, and Greg's a good friend of ours that we are bringing into this conversation today because there has been a tremendous interest in this topic between the three of us that we just felt that it definitely would be an added thing to have all three of us here during this discussion. And guys, this is one topic that and I've heard this said on several other interviews on this topic. I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would even look at this topic and even I don't know, even consider it in the slightest way, but the evidence and the clues that have been put out there have made me take a step back. And, I like to think that I have an open mind, and I try to keep it open enough that my brains don't fall out, and I'm able to let things in that may shed some light on some of the things that we're experiencing on this planet in this experience here on planet Earth. So we've got Mark Sargent with us tonight, and he's been really actually shaking up the airwaves here in the last couple of months with some videos that he did on YouTube, the Flat Earth Clues videos. And guys, there's definitely links below on the show page that you guys can click on. It'll take you right to his video page, his YouTube video page. And I would definitely urge all of you, and it may be a good idea before you listen to the rest of this interview, if you just stop the audio right now and click on that link and watch the clues 1 through 11, and then come back and listen to our conversation, and then you'll be able to get a lot more out of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon than if you hadn't. So anyways, there you have it, and welcome to the 100th Monkey Radio, Mark.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Man, I kind of like, our subject matter here on the 100th Monkey is primarily we focus in on the consciousness and spirituality aspects of what's going on here, and it's the basic raising of the baseline of consciousness on the planet, and that 100th the monkey effect is that point that the collective consciousness reaches that critical mass, and that fact or that truth that was at one point ridiculous to everybody all of a sudden becomes one of those automatic truths that, oh, everybody knows that type idea. So going from that basis, and I think truth is the only thing that actually can trigger that 100th monkey effect, real truth. And this topic, the flat Earth, oh man, what can you say? I mean, our whole lives from day one that we have that globe in the classroom. That's one of the first things you see when you're going to kindergarten is they've always got the globe sitting right there on the teacher's desk, and it's an automatic assumption that we always continually make about the environment that we live in. I don't know. I know there's a word for that.
Programming. We don't even take a second thought to even question it. Our minds don't even journey there. I've never once thought of flat Earth. Like in history books, you hear about the past history. People used to think the Earth was flat and they were crazy, But never once would I actually contemplate this thought until I got on YouTube and looked at a couple of videos, and now everything is in question. I mean, from ground zero. I mean, if you can rock somebody's foundation, everything built on top of that is what? Who knows? Right?
Yeah.
So what got you interested in this, Mark?
Flat out boredom. It was being going into the conspiracy stuff. I looked at everything, and literally this was the last book on the shelf. And I had refused to read it for so long because, again, like you guys were saying, it's ridiculous, it's ludicrous, it's madness. There's no way, because we were raised with it. There's no way. Everybody knows what the truth is. The truth is a globe. Has to be. Absolutely has to be. But when I started digging into it, I couldn't exactly tell why I thought it was the truth. It was the same thing that everybody else says. It's like, how do you know it's a globe? And well, we just know. But how do you really know? And that's when I started digging. So, yeah.
I've flown, I've made well over 50 airplane rides or whatever, right? Flights. Yeah. And since hearing about this, I've thought about, and really, really try to remember looking at the windows. And every version that I have and every flight I've taken, looking out the windows, even still, just, you would think being that high in the air, there would be a no mistakable curve or something, but it just seems like it just goes on forever in all directions, no matter which way you look, no matter how high you fly. Yeah. But even back then, not even a question, not even a second thought.
No. If you would have asked me a year ago, I would have laughed at you. Absolutely would have laughed you out of the room. And this is coming from a guy, who went to comic book conventions and, seriously thought about driving out to Area 51 and having his picture taken by the sign and all that stuff. And still, again, and that kind of gives you a scope of how big it really is. It's so buried that even the conspiracy guys won't touch it. And then for whatever reason this year, there's just so much activity revolving around it. And when I was looking at it, a lot of the flat Earth stuff that was out there, there was some good stuff, but it seemed to me it was coming in like a staticky radio station. Right. And I sat on it for a while, and then I was like, and you know what? If somebody gives this thing some structure, I think I could clear up the station and really do something here. And I had no idea it was going to get the response it did. The videos you're looking at, they're not even 6 weeks old, and right. It's just been, and the response, the other thing is the response has been so positive. You'd think after I put my phone number out there that I would get crank calls in the middle of the night, from drunk people, you're nuts, and hang up.
You are pretty nuts. That's pretty brave to throw that out there like that.
I don't know if it was brave as much I did it to stop the immediate label of shill, which seems to be thrown out there so much. And it's like, okay, look, here's my name, here's my email address, here's my my phone number, and then by the time I got to number 10, I put my my actual home address, so you can Google Map it, and for the most part that worked. I get the occasional person that says, "Oh, it's too polished," it's got to be less professional. It's like, what? It's like,
yeah, really.
It's like. So anyway, but yeah, it's been an interesting short couple of months.
So I think in the videos or in one of the interviews you've done already that you mentioned that the cincher for you was the United Nations map.
Yeah, that
was the one that took you over the top.
That was that. Yeah, that in Antarctica. But yeah, they go hand in hand. But yeah, the United Nations flag, and that again, I didn't discover that on my own. I built off of people like everybody else. And even I asked Matt from the NASA channel. I said, were you the first one to bring it up? He goes, no, man, I got it from somewhere else, and he didn't say where, but yeah, it's a perfect point, which is the Antarctica map is the flat Earth map. I'm sorry, the UN map is the flat Earth map, and there's no Antarctica on it.
Right.
And it's fascinating.
So can you explain for everybody who's listening what flat Earth looks like?
The flat Earth looks like, for me, and there's going to be some disagreements. In the flat Earth movement, as nuts as that sounds, it's actually a movement. There's two schools of thought, really. One is that it's a perfect plane, that it's just perfectly flat, with the exception of the ridges and the mountains and stuff like that. But for me, I try to be a little more flexible, and that was, I went with the if anyone wants to look it up online, the flat and stationary Earth model by Orlando Ferguson that he made in 1830, which is a little more. It helps out a little bit more with the moonrise and sunrise and sunset and moonset, where it's kind of shaped like a roulette table, where it's kind of got that bulge in the middle around the North Pole. And then for me, it kind of flattens out a little more. It doesn't dip as much as his, and then, raises up naturally because the Antarctic continent is all at an elevation of 2 miles. So that's pretty much what it looks like. And there's a guy that I'm dealing with out in Jersey. I hope he makes it. He's trying to create a more realistic 3D model of it, because there just aren't any out there. There's some animations which aren't bad, and you can find those on YouTube, but an actual physical 3D model is almost impossible to find.
Right. Yeah. Well, that model actually is the one that makes the most sense to me for just what we are able to physically see in our world. The way the sun and moon actually rotate. How do you create night and day on a flat plane? On
a perfectly flat plane, which was the big thing I went with, And again, there's an animation out there. I'm not going to reference it right this second, but if you've got kind of a bulge in the center, it really, really helps with the whole sun, dealing with the issue of having sunrise and moonrise. Because if it's perfectly flat, you got some problems about having too much coverage, in my opinion.
So let's hit on a couple of these clues here, so our listeners can get a little bit better idea of what the hell we're talking about and why we would be talking about this seriously. How about let's go to Byrd. Everybody, I would have to say that the majority of our listeners know who Admiral Byrd was due to our shows that we have done on Hollow Earth theories and stuff. So
the Byrd wall, for me was my absolute point of no return because of that wonderful footage that got leaked out. I think it was by a CBS guy from 1954 from the show that's not on the air anymore called the Longines Chronoscope. Horrible name. And where Admiral Byrd came on television in 1954 and was talking, at that point, you got to remember, he was an American hero. And he did, major press tours and ticker tape parades, the whole 9 yards. And he came on and said that Antarctica was pretty much made out of money. And it had all these resources in the world. He couldn't stop gushing about it. That was the part that got me. Was it's like, oh look, there's their entire mountain range made out of coal. There's oil, there's minerals, there's uranium, and all these countries are down there. All the major powers that were survived after World War II. Everybody's going to start divvying this thing up, and and plus there was an entire chunk of land larger than the entire continental United States, which he hadn't even flown over yet. And that they were just going to make money. And right after that, very shortly after, so that was in 1954 when he did the interview. He talked about in the interview how they were prepping for Operation Deep Freeze, which was the United States, big expedition the next year. And then after Operation Deep Freeze, everything changed. And, within a very, very short amount of time, there was a chain of events where the corporations were pretty much the Antarctica was locked down tighter than a drum, and a treaty was put in place in 1959, and no one was allowed to do anything there. And from an economic standpoint, that was just ludicrous. We all know how the world works. It is driven off greed and money and power, and they were sealing off all these resources, in 1959. And of course, now there's layers. There's a veneer layer on top of that, on top of the treaty, Environmental Protection Act, and that is also just silly because it's like, well, okay, but that doesn't apply in 1959. So why were you sealing off in 1959? No one talks about it. I mean, people don't realize that Greenpeace wasn't even founded until 1971, and that was just a few hippies in a rubber raft, right, back then. So. It goes against, for me, that it was a real turning point because, again, I've watched so much stuff and you guys have too, where the corporations can do anything if you have enough money. There isn't oil companies literally have unlimited power when it comes to getting access to places. Right. They can frack anywhere they want. They can go into national parks. They can go anywhere they want. All they have to do is lobby and bribe the right amount of politicians. But when it comes to Antarctica, literally, they can't even bring the topic up. They cannot petition it. Nobody talks about it. And it's just amazing to me that it's just never been noticed after all this time.
Have you read the treaty from, what year was that, 59?
59. I have read quite a bit of it, and not all of it. Obviously, I didn't memorize all the things, but you brought up some of that to me in an email, didn't you?
Geez, I don't know, maybe.
That's okay. But I did read quite a bit of it. They sealed off pretty much everything, and the caveats, the big points were that almost since day one was no corporations will get in there. There will be no resource gathering at all, and you have 10 nations that sign it in the beginning, and then every nation that becomes economically viable, as they develop around the world, and there's now 50 nations, every nation that becomes economically viable then has to sign it. Right. When does that happen? Plus it's unilateral on top of it. Russia was trying to rebuild after World War II. England was not in great shape after World War II. They got bombed pretty seriously. Right. And they could have used these resources. You think British Petroleum's not going to go down there? Yeah, of course they're going to go down there. And so what's big, for me, it was so easy. It's like, what's so big that not only are you not, what's bigger than money? And what's so big that you can't even come up with a decent cover story? Even after all these years, you've had decades to come up with a cover story and let people on there, and you still won't do it.
Right.
Then create the GPS system, which I have no doubt helps that cause, and just amazing. But again, it's been hidden so well because for the most part, our attention has been diverted from that part of the world. Right. So why would anybody think about it?
Right. Yeah. Playing devil's advocate, there's and this is how I try to approach my research. I ask, what are the other answers? What are the other answers to this cause? That we have a cause. What are this effect, or however we want to term this? Yeah. What are the other answers? What are the other possibilities that are that this is in place down there? Mm-hmm. So when I looked at just the Antarctica, that treaty. Mm-hmm. The first thing that came to mind, and probably the strongest one out there in the alternative community, anyways, mm-hmm. has to be the Nazis, right?
Of course.
And there is, if you look into that, there is a lot of evidence out there that they went south.
And I would agree with you. However, and people, that's been thrown at me quite a bit. However, the timing was wrong, because Operation High Jump, if you believe in the Nazi theory, and I lend it some credibility. It's very possible that the remaining Nazi Navy went down there and tried to make a stronghold, but that was in 1946. Right. Operation High Jump was 1946, and if something really, really bad happened down there in 1946, they would have sealed it off earlier, because by 1954, when Byrd did that interview, you could tell he didn't have a care in the world. Whatever happened with Operation High Jump, and we're never going to find that out. Whatever happened there, they took care of it. So if they had to, if they went toe to toe with the Nazis, and didn't want to tell anybody about it, that's fine. Were UFOs involved? Yeah, maybe, but whatever it was, they took care of it. And enough time had elapsed that by 1954 it was business as usual, and they were going to and some people have claimed it's like, oh, Byrd had to be a disinfo guy because he was a Mason and he's military. It's like yeah, fine, maybe he was, but the hype that he was putting on the economic aspect of it, there'd be no benefit to hype that up, because if anything, it was like he was getting the corporations ready, because in my mind they hadn't found it. And I think at that point they're going, well, maybe we'll never find it. And there's Murphy's Law, because the very next expedition, they run into it.
Right. Yeah. Well, in that interview that he does, mm-hmm. You can see the enthusiasm he has for it. He's excited that that there's all these resources down there. It's like, there's enough coal down there to power the planet for an indefinite period of time.
Or that uranium line that where he was kind of backpedaling. He's going, maybe I shouldn't talk about uranium. I don't want people to start fighting over uranium down there. Right. It's like, and again, the unilateral. It's like, again, if it was only America that backed out and pulled out, that's one thing. Right. But to have, every country. There was at least 7 nations down there, including, Britain and Russia. Russia? Really? Russia's going to back out on their own? No. It doesn't happen.
Here's a theory that pops into my head right off the bat.
Sure.
And they met the caretakers.
Very possible.
And the caretaker said, this is a place you cannot go.
Very possible.
And if you do, you'll be in trouble.
Yes. Yeah. Very possible. I thought of that too, where, if it wasn't a passable barrier, maybe it was a guarded barrier. Maybe it was, maybe it was ships on the ice that weren't going to move.
If that kind of a group of people are moving down there, and we do have some form of caretaker, something that is watching us here, which I'm pretty damn sure that there's something.
Yeah.
Then they're going to see these people headed to the south. They're going to see people approaching the wall.
Yep.
And if they get too close, they're going to intervene.
Agreed. I do agree with you there. And then for me, regardless of if the caretakers are there or not, or if it's a soft boundary or a hard boundary, then it got really interesting because again, all these moves that they made were so decisive. Where you leave the ice and then you immediately, Russia and America, the only countries that could do it at the time, immediately just start fast tracking their rocket program, like their lives depended on it. And then, a year within the rocket program of being escalated, they all of a sudden start attaching nukes to them and firing them straight up on, from both sides. And, and then immediately after that, you form NASA. 1959, you lock down Antarctica, and then you keep firing the nukes. Not the big stuff though. It seemed like they were probing after 1958, and then they both stopped firing on exactly the same day. In 1962, one of the packages that they were using for the groups of nuclear tests on the American side was called Operation Fishbowl. Where they came up with that name, I have no idea at all. That's
wow! Here's your sign.
Yeah, you couldn't. It's like, really, that's the name you're going to pick? You couldn't come up with a coded name. And then, the shots end in 1962. They say, it was a moratorium on aerial testing. No, it wasn't. They both agreed. Yeah, America and Russia were absolutely in hand on hand, on that aspect. And anyway, sorry, that was my rant.
So, do you think Admiral Byrd knew what was down there, and that's why he gave the hype for come down here and you'll make money? There's uranium and coal. Do you think that he knew that there was something else down there and he wanted to get more people on board just to get down there to figure out what was going on?
It's hard to say because, like, if you take an Indiana Jones scenario like that, you don't have to let him in on the loop. Like, for example, let's say there were ancient societies that you know who we're talking about here, who had the old maps. And they was like, okay, let's see if this map is true, because you don't know until you know. And so you send them down there starting in 1928, and you just keep sending them out there. You don't have to tell him what you're looking for. All you have to do is tell him, go as far as you can and map the whole thing. And then you can keep him out of the loop, and then there's nothing, he's an innocent in it. Let's put it this way, there's no benefit to letting him in on it.
Right.
And so after those first 30 years of explorations where he didn't find anything, 4 full-blown expeditions, including high jump, at that point you're going, all right, well, again, it's that weird movie thing you can't make up, and that is, he's obviously not finding anything. Let's just call it quits and make a ton of money for the next 100 years. And then, of course, then it all went wrong the very next year. So no, the short answer is no. I do not think he knew because if he knew, I don't think you dare let him on television to start doing that, because right. you don't want to get the corporation salivating. It would make no sense. You do not want to have Exxon and Chevron and British Petroleum and all the mineral companies start drawing up plans, which really that's all was going to happen, and then just say, oh yeah, by the way, no one's going there. That there had to been some really interesting conversations between execs in 1959 when that whole thing went down.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, because you couldn't tell them either. You just had to say, look, it's a national security issue, and we're not going to talk about it. And if you want some money, it's fine. If you don't, we're going to make you go away. So
I wonder with the aerial nuke stuff, if they were able to actually, And this you probably won't be able to answer, but I'm wondering if they were able to actually get any kind of a good picture of what the dome looked like.
I think they could get I think after the first ones, because if you look at the tests, and you can Google this is at least the public test, high altitude nuclear explosions, it looked like if you used aerial bursts, you could get a pretty good idea if your cameras were good enough of the arc. All you have to do is test arcs in different places, and so you had America on one side and Russia on the other side. Between the two of them, if they were sharing data, which I think they were, you could paint a pretty good picture. Especially since the nukes they were using after 1958, most of them were pretty small, less than a megaton for almost all of them, except for those two really, really big shots in 1958, which were I think 3.8 megaton apiece, which were monstrous for 1958. I mean, I think those are the biggest things we could build. So
I wonder if any of them, and I haven't really looked into the nuke aspect of this very closely, or as far as launch sites and where all these happened at. I'm curious if any of them happened in the lower latitudes.
I don't know about the Russian stuff, but most of the American stuff, and again, if you want to watch and we're not getting to the debate on if nukes were real or not, watch Trinity and Beyond, a wonderful documentary that was done by William Shatner some years ago. Or, I'm sorry, he narrated. There was a guy from Lucasfilms that put it together, but most of the American shots were in the South Pacific.
Right.
And there's some great pictures of them shooting. They were close enough to, in some cases, to where Hawaii could see the blast.
Right.
So.
Right. All right. So you guys, anything on?
Well, I would like if you can explain how this flat Earth theory, sort of paint a picture in my head how it works.
Okay.
Compared to how we think this round Earth theory works, how does this make sense?
Compare it to the real super easy analogy I'd use, and I did this in Clue 4 called Shell Beach, is really the one that most people gravitate to because I get it quoted to me in email all the time, is the Truman Show, which is just a large version of the Truman Show. Let's say the Truman Show was 20 miles across, and if you're trying to visualize it, it's flat-ish on the ground, and then it's surrounded by a giant solid structure that can be projected on either from behind, from underneath or behind. I'd prefer behind, to where it simulates you being in an open space. No different than, if you guys have ever been to Disneyland, I don't think I've thrown out this reference. Go do the old Pirates of the Caribbean ride from the 1950s. It's a wonderful thing. Your boat's going through this thing. If you look up at the ceiling and your eyes are adjusted, you see absolute depth. You think there's stars and planets and it's a beautiful setting, but you're just in a sound stage. That's all you're in. Now expand that to the structure, in our case, let's say 8,000 miles wide.
Yeah.
And if you have a structure that wide, you wouldn't even need to do it that high. Most people think, it's like a snow globe thing where, it's 8,000 miles wide and 6,000 miles high. No, you don't have to do it. It would actually resemble more of like a football stadium where you'd only have to have it, say, 400 miles high, which is actually, compared to 8,000 miles wide, that's a really low ceiling. But since commercial traffic caps out at about 10 miles, everything above, and then spy planes, 20 miles, give or take. Everything else is almost impossible for 99.99% of the population to even consider.
Right.
With the exception of these, the rare public space programs that are having so much fun as of late.
Yeah.
So does that kind of help?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah,
okay.
That helps.
So it's kind of, I have things like so many of these conspiracies and theories that have been bandied around for the last 5 or 6 years about Nibiru, Planet X, and people getting these photographs of the shadow moon or the planet next to the sun.
Oh, yeah.
And I see these, and most of these shots are all when the sun's, fairly close to the horizon.
Yep.
Within, I'd say probably most of them are within 20 degrees of horizon.
Yep.
And if when I take that and I overlay it on a flat Earth theory, well, geez, that almost kind of explains itself. We got a little bit of refraction or reflection off of the dome that is only seen at a certain angle, and
there you go. Yeah. If the sun is way, way closer, that if it is not 92 million miles away, if it's less than 1,000 miles away, then all that activity. Because I always wondered that too when I was looking. I probably saw the same stuff you did, where you see these objects that are really close to the sun, but they're pretty big, and you're going, if those are ships, they're as big as Jupiter.
Right. If this is a planet, it's 3/4 the size of the sun.
Yeah, it's monstrous. Some of this stuff was really, really big, but that all changes if it's an enclosed system, because then that object becomes way, way smaller and closer, and then it changes the whole perspective. As far as Nibiru goes, boy, that's going to be an interesting one, because let's put it this way: if there is some sort of weird event where Nibiru comes, all of a sudden you see it in the sky and all this, at that point I think it'd be just a brilliant example of something that's staged, because again, even that would reinforce the globe model. As I mentioned to somebody else the other day, was when we see, I think some of the stuff, and this is the clever side, yes, a lot of the stuff that NASA does is ridiculous and stupid, but some of the stuff they do is pretty clever, like the face on Mars or that weird hexagon on top of Saturn, because as soon as you look at the face on Mars and think, hey, that's pretty interesting, wonder what that's all about, as soon as you acknowledge that, where you are now instantly becomes a globe by assumption. You immediately think, I'm looking at a cool thing on Mars because I'm on Earth and it's a globe. But so if you release stories like that on a regular basis, oh, we're doing a probe like this. Oh, hey, by the way, the Mars rover is still working even though it's supposed to be dead 7 years ago. It automatically kicks your mind into the globe model.
Right.
Which is why those people, like, I had an email a couple days ago where someone was saying that, or no, it was a post on YouTube where they were saying, oh yeah, Mark forgot about these movies that were about the moon missions, and one was called Moon, and one was called, oh crap, what was the other one? I can't remember off the top of my head, but Moon was a movie, a science fiction movie. Oh, the other one was Apollo 18. Moon was a science fiction movie done in 2009, where where there were clones on the moon, and Apollo 18, which didn't exist in real life. Apollo 18 never happened. Was about little crab monsters that disguise themselves as moon rocks. It's like, really, you guys are falling right into what I'm saying here, and that is, there are movies out there that you think are real and they're not. So.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Well, I am an amateur astronomer.
Okay.
And I've got a nice 8-inch Celestron telescope, and
cool.
I've had my eye on quite a few of the planets. Well, majority of the planets that are visible.
Yep.
I haven't got out to, obviously haven't been able to pinpoint Pluto. It's a little rough to hit with a 8-inch telescope.
Sure.
But when I just look at the closer planets, the Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Moon. Mm-hmm. Moon's probably my most favorite one to look at. I mean, because there's some bizarre anomalies there.
Yeah.
And the Moon is probably the easiest one to actually see this on, but I can see the curvature and the spherical shape of the moon through the telescope.
Yes.
Without a doubt, it is very, if it's just a projection, it's a freaking amazing job at a projection. Looking at that stuff and seeing it with my own eyes and through my own gear and my, undoubtedly no tampering involved there on this end. When I look at this stuff and it's in plain sight, I have to acknowledge, at least with a 99% certainty, that there is a physical object there that I'm looking at. Agreed.
And I had a round table a couple days ago where a guy from Australia was saying, he was actually, trying to nail me down. And he said, do you think the moon is a 3-dimensional object? And I go, yes, absolutely I do. I think there's something being overlaid on the top of it now, after watching some of the YouTube stuff, but I absolutely think it's a 3-dimensional object, as well as the sun. And you'd really, in a flat model, and I'm not stealing from the original flat model stuff that's out there like Orlando Ferguson, but you'd want those things to be three-dimensional objects because they're big enough in the sky that they're going to show so much more detail that you really need the extra production on it. You don't want to play it off like Saturn or Jupiter, especially with the moon. The sun, it's a little tougher because nobody's staring at the sun with a telescope most of the time anyway. But the moon, is the most photographed object I think of all time, and you need the extra detail. And only now does it seem, especially with the videos that are out there on YouTube, does it seem that our camera technology, especially HD technology, seems to be catching up with whatever technology is being used for the projection system. And I'll quote the lunar waves, and that is, imagine if our HD technology was only a few milliseconds behind the refresh rate of whatever is being used for that moon object, which is why we seem to be finding some chinks in the armor here.
Right. Yeah, and for you guys out there listening, there's a guy out there on YouTube that's doing some amazing videos. He's got some pretty good shots of a kind of a distortion wave that goes across the face of the moon. His YouTube is Crow CRROW777, and I'll throw a link to his YouTube on this show page also for you guys. So
yeah.
Got some good information there.
Yeah, and I reference him even though he's not a flat earther yet, and I haven't reached out to him or anything. I'm going to let him find this out on his own. But the stuff that he's looking at dovetails perfectly into the model that I'm using. It just, it's like, look, the moon is not what you think it is, and it just falls in line with everything else that you don't think what it is. So,
right. So, let's go on the assumption that we are living in some sort of a contained environment. And dome or layered, or how would you picture that? How would you picture it as like just a dome or a screen, or would you if it's layered similar to the models that come out of ancient India?
You mean like the world elephant? One of those things?
Right.
Yeah. Also, by the way, the world elephant's a wonderful little depiction, even though I don't necessarily, if it's on the back of elephants, that's on the back of a giant turtle, that's one thing. But what I think was interesting about the world elephant, little side note, is that it's mentioned, if you look it up on Wikipedia, that it had a reference in the first paragraph to al-Biruni in did he cite any of the world elephant stuff in his literature? And I was going, why would you reference this guy? I didn't think it was a coincidence. Al-Biruni was the guy that proposed the map that the United Nations uses for their flag in the USGS, and also al-Biruni, the same guy who NASA named a moon crater after. And he's tied to the world elephant, which is just bizarre. For me, though, the dome, what I consider to be a very well cloaked structure. I had a guy from Austria call me recently, and he goes, well, if the structure out, in Antarctica, goes straight up, or at a very slight curve, and it goes up hundreds of kilometers, you should be able to see it from quite a distance. Even if you were on the edge of Antarctica, you might be able to see it. And I said, well, no, because you'd cloak it. It's same as the Truman Show. You're not going to just, paint a black. It's not going to be a black dome. It's going to be, translucent in some aspect. But as far as the overall layout, it would, because I tried to design this thing from scratch, coming from a game design background, you'd have, again, whatever material it's out of, is it an energy material? Is it a super heavy element? Well, not sure, but it's apparently immune to nuclear weapons. And then on the top of it, you have layers and layers of projection systems pointing at it. So you could project in 2D or 3D, the stars and planets, and you wouldn't even have to. I would use some sort of holographic imaging program, because that'll give you some added depth to the system, so it doesn't appear like just a beautiful painting or a beautiful rendered image. It would be stars layered upon stars, laying apart stars, and if that takes miles to do, well, you've got the room and the technology to do it, and then that goes out to some degree, and after that, well, then it's, anybody's guess. Is it, there's some people said, okay, if it's a thin dome-like structure, is there another side to the coin, literally? If you didn't want to waste space or resources, is there another dome that's facing the other direction on the other side? It's very possible. Or are you in a giant room with more, domes? And for me, I love that idea, because if you're going to build one, you're not going to just build one. You're going to build more. Right. You're going to build several, and you're going to have all sorts of fun stuff. But for me, when I made the clues, I tried to get people not to stretch their mind too far, because this topic as itself is quite a mind bender.
Oh, so. Yeah.
So what does gravity do the closer you get to Antarctica? What are the effects of gravity?
Oh, well, it when as close as you get to Antarctica, it shouldn't make any difference, because, and people have asked, is it, would it be spinning, like is the ground spinning like a merry-go-round? And I've seen other people do theories like that. It's like, well, it's not the way I'd go, because if that was, as you moved out towards Antarctica, you'd run into more and more centrifugal force.
Right?
I'm sorry, what?
It would just seem like you would get thrown off.
Well, not necessarily thrown off, but thrown straight into the wall. Plus, you'd run into stuff like the oceans. And again, you want to get into some weird stuff. Ask a scientist sometime how centrifugal force works on a globe, because if it's supposed to also be spinning like a merry-go-round, then why aren't the oceans pulled up at the center in this this giant ball of water? This giant strip of water around the middle. So no, I don't.
We're only going at what 1,000 miles an hour.
Oh yeah, it's only 1,000 miles an hour. I mean, what could that do? That should be nothing, right? But 1,000 miles an hour still generates. Again, it doesn't have to generate so much torque, but 1,000 miles an hour is still enough to do something when it comes to water and the oceans. So I'm sorry. Answer your question. Nothing. If it's a stationary enclosed system, gravity wouldn't be any different out at the outer edge. So,
and this is another one that I haven't looked into, and I don't even know if there's any data out there. I'm guessing there probably is about the gravitational forces on the planet right now. I mean, if say considering it, let's look at it as a sphere. Is there difference in gravitational forces from, say, the equator to the pole?
That's an excellent question, and nobody seems to want to address it from a scientific standpoint, which is, again, it's that centrifugal force thing, whereas centrifugal force is going to fight gravity. It does in a merry-go-round. You stand on the edge of a merry-go-round, it is going to try to throw you off. If you take a 100-pound weight and put it on the North Pole, technically, there's no real centrifugal. If it's a globe, there's no real centrifugal force there. A 100-pound weight will weigh 100 pounds. But if you take that same weight and take it down to the equator, it should weigh somewhat less. And scientists will say, oh, well, it's not going to weigh that much less. Well, yeah, we've got some pretty precision instruments here. And you can't tell me that 1,000 miles an hour centrifugal force isn't going to affect that weight to a certain degree. And if that means it's only a couple ounces per 100 pounds, it still should be measurable. And nobody addresses it. It's a good point.
That'd be an interesting one for. So I know we've got several scientists that actually are avid listeners of the show. Come on, guys.
Yeah,
see some data.
It's going to be something, and I don't care if it's a fraction of an ounce. It should be measurable, because if it isn't, you're going to lose either way on the science standpoint. If it isn't measurable, then you have to explain why centrifugal force is not affecting gravity. And if it is, then it should be proven. So they're going to be stuck either way. But again, the way this place was built, it naturally stops stuff like that. There's between mostly with climate and altitude, and oxygen levels, because how many people are going to get the chance to go to a North Pole and ever in their lives, and then how many people are actually going to go up just to take a 100-pound weight and then take that same 100-pound weight down to the equator? Because unfortunately, you have to use the same one, otherwise people will say, well, you're using different objects. So.
Right. Well, I would think you could do it even within should be some measurable effect even within, say, 1,000, 2,000 mile difference.
You're right. Centrifugal force up here in the northern hemisphere, yeah, it's not spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and I can't remember what the ratio is at like New York or Los Angeles, but it's going to be definitely hundreds of miles an hour. Maybe 500, 600 miles an hour. Yeah, there should be something.
Yeah. That'd be an interesting one to try.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it wouldn't make any difference, and that would lead credence to flat Earth.
Yeah, and there was a guy that suggested, if it actually was real, then the super clever rich people, what you do is, you'd buy gold in the southern, near the equator, and then sell it north, when it's heavier.
Right.
Well, that's actually pretty clever, but we would have heard about that by now.
Oh, geez, let's see. Where next?
Take your pick.
Take my pick. Well, let's just take let's go real quick over the maps. I mean, we mentioned the UN flag.
Yep.
Once you thought all the different versions we have here, and a little bit of the history there.
Sure. The clue 3 that I did, map makers, that was a lot of fun because even though for me I was already hooked by number 2, map makers was a lot of fun because I was digging up stuff at that point that I didn't even know existed. Which the biggest being was the map projections. And people out there that haven't figured this out yet, if you wiki the Flat Earth Society, you'll see a map there, and it's a top-down view of the Earth. It's like a squished globe from the North Pole. So the North Pole is the center of a big circle, and then the continents are surrounded by that, and then the outer edge is just one big ring of ocean, and then Antarctica is literally stretched as a giant icy ring around the entire thing, and that's the Flat Earth map. You're thinking, well, that works. But the exact same map is in the official wiki list of map projections, and the only one in there which is of note is the azimuthal equidistant map, which is about 3/4 down the page, and it's a circular map, and it doesn't mean much to you, but it looks exactly like the Flat Earth map. And then you look at the links to it, and those are even more interesting, which is the fact that, one, it was proposed 1,000 years ago by a Persian scientist. For those people who don't know their history, Persia became Iran later, unless I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it became Iran later. But a Persian scientist named al-Biruni, his full name I'm not going to pronounce because I'll just massacre it. And al-Biruni he proposed this map, even though this map projection style, even though the map officially couldn't be finished. So the question is, why is the United States Geologic Survey, a giant United States government branch, why is that map being used by them as their official view on the world? And why is that map also being used as the UN? And a guy pointed out to me the other day, he's going, that map was actually proposed for it became the UN flag during Operation High Jump. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. He pointed that out. And I was trying to figure out the connection. It's like, okay, maybe they were jumping the gun a bit, and maybe they knew eventually Byrd would find it. But for me, it was like, I just think they were jumping the gun. It was like, maybe they knew, but again, you still don't know until you know. What else, is very interesting, and I'll actually do this in Clue 12 when I put it together. I'm doing something a little different with Clue 12, but it kind of bugged me in the map projections. Like most people don't understand that the classroom map that you see that covers your blackboard that gets pulled down is called the Mercator map. And even that map is extremely wrong. That is not the map. That is not the accurate depiction of the world. But it is what the authority has determined we are so much more comfortable with. You ask any scientist, they'll say, "Oh yeah, no, that map's completely wrong. We should be using the Gall-Peters map, GALL space Peters map, and that shows the accurate depiction of how countries are, the size comparison. Like South America is monstrous on the Gall-Peters map, which is exactly how it would be. And the most notable one, when we're growing up, we see Greenland on that map that's on our blackboard now. We say, oh wow, Greenland's just about as big as Africa, but Africa is 17 times larger than Greenland. So why are we looking at this map? And the point I'm getting at here is, and I'll bring this up in the next clue that I do, is that the governments and the authority, they won't even let us see that. They're trying to introduce that in school. The scientists absolutely know that the Mercator map is wrong, but they won't even change that. And so people say, oh, why would they hide it? Hide the worldview from us. And if it was an enclosed system, it's going, are you kidding? They won't even change the school map to reflect accurate distances. Don't tell me what they won't do, because they absolutely will not, show this voluntarily. So.
Yeah, another one of the clues that are out there that kind of blew me away is the airline thing in the southern hemisphere.
Oh, I lucked out with that one.
Oh,
I was so happy to find that. In fact, I was happy twice, because the first one was clue 7, which was the long haul. There was a German guy that put out some YouTube videos, and it was all in German text, but I could understand the screenshots he was putting up, and he was saying, look, the connections in the southern hemisphere are all wrong. And it didn't make sense to him. And for those out there listening who don't understand, in the northern hemisphere, we take nonstops for granted. It's not even a question of getting a nonstop flight. If you want to fly from wherever you are to New York or Los Angeles or wherever, it's not even a question of getting a nonstop. It's just how cheap you're going to get it. In the southern hemisphere, though, for whatever reason, 95% of the flights are not nonstop. And by that, I mean mostly anything near Australia and anything in South America, including New Zealand. There just aren't any nonstops. I mean, you could find just a handful, and I cannot tell you how many people sent the Santiago, Chile to Auckland, New Zealand flight to me after I did Clue 7, but we'll get to that in a second. But the connections, they send you all over the place. So from Australia to South America, it's only 7,400 miles, and it should be a straight shot across the South Pacific Ocean. But for whatever reason, they just kept bouncing you off of all these different cities, and it just didn't make any sense to me until I started looking at it from a flat map, because all the connections on a flat map in the southern hemisphere line up. They're extremely efficient, but only if you use an actual literal flat map like the azimuthal equidistant map, and so. That was just the first part of it, and that was the connections. So it was part of the 3 rules, but the biggest rule, if the world is enclosed and they're trying to hide it, is the southern hemisphere plane routes will be wrong, and they were all wrong. They were dead wrong. They were sending connections all over the place. So after I did Clue 7, people are saying, I love people's logic. Sometimes it just baffles me. They're saying, oh, there's these nonstop flights. There's like 5 of them in the entire southern hemisphere. It's like, so you have a handful of nonstop flights. That doesn't bug you. You're just going to put that in my face and say, oh, there's nonstop flights. So it's like, okay, I'll figure out what's going on. So because it couldn't happen. You can't have a nonstop flight that crosses that ocean. It just cannot happen. So I start staring at some of the real-time tracker systems. So the GPS, the United States Department of Defense GPS system, they let that data leak out to various websites around the world, so that people can watch planes. So if you're watching your family fly from New York to Los Angeles, you can watch that plane in real time. But it's global. You can GPS, global positioning system. And I was watching all these flights in the southern hemisphere, anything below the equator. And I was looking for these nonstop flights, and I was staring at them for a few days, and nothing was showing up on the screen. There was nothing crossing these oceans. And people can open up, anyone, the one I tend to point at is planefinder.net. You can open it up right now. And there's nothing in these 3 oceans, the South Pacific, the South Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. I was going, and after a few days, it all of a sudden hit me. It's like, wait a minute, there should be something in those oceans, because connections at least are going to start going through there. And there wasn't. And then I started looking at the plane flights themselves, and as they were leaving cities from anywhere in the southern hemisphere, as soon as they got over open water, the planes would blink out and disappear. And then I saw what was happening, and it was like, I gotcha. It was overkill, but it was very effective, in that if you had some nonstop flights and you couldn't show the routes, you had to make sure those routes weren't seen by anybody. So you make the planes fall off the GPS system entirely. You'd blink out the planes, and you'd literally make them disappear until the plane was almost to its destination, no matter where it was. And then an hour before it landed, the plane would reappear, and then the plane would land. And their logic is, well, it obviously made it from point A to point B, so therefore the flight exists, and everything's fine. But what they're not telling you is how the plane got there, and they can't, because the route that the planes take do not make any sense on a globe. They do not make sense. They only make sense on a flat map. But so their answer was they're just not going to show it to you.
Yeah. Did any of that handful of nonstops that they sent you have flight times with them?
Oh yeah. There was some flight times, but again, the flight times actually matched up pretty well if you were taking the shortcut. If you were using the azimuthal map, those flight times actually worked for the most part. But again, people would, I cannot tell you how many times, again, why is there only one flight that everyone quotes me? The Santiago, Chile to Auckland, New Zealand. Wait, there's no other nonstop flights out there, but they kept quoting that one. I was going, yeah, fine. My answer was always the same. Show me how it got there. Don't tell me that it landed. Tell me how it got there, because I absolutely know for a fact it couldn't have gone over the ocean, because on the azimuthal map, the ocean, the route is not 7,400 miles across an open ocean. That ocean it's stretched and is much, much longer. It's over 10,000 miles long. And so no plane, there's limits to plane distance, even with long distance long haul planes. You can't use it. You have to take order to keep everybody on the same page, you have to take the quickest route. And they've been lucky for all these years. The pilots don't care. It's on autopilot. Passengers, they're just sleeping or getting drunk in their seats. So nobody's really picked up on it.
That'd be one that I'd be curious to. For those flight times to be anywhere near respectable as far as the globe model is concerned, they would have to have a few jets that were able to exceed what is the 777 at now? 70 or 680 miles an hour or something.
Yeah. You'd have to punch it, and hope that you can make up the time, but it's just not feasible. The pilots would notice that more than they would other things. And again, nowadays, the GPS system takes over as soon as they lift off. As soon as they get to like 20,000 feet, is not very far from the airport at all. They just flip the switch and GPS does the rest. Pilots, just start, listening to books on tape and, thinking about what hotel they're going to stay in, when they land. The pilots don't necessarily care. And which I touched on in the videos, because people say, oh, the pilots are absolutely going to know. It's like, no, because think of the leap of faith that they would have to make from their point of view. Even if they look down below and realize that what was down below their plane didn't make sense, who are they going to tell? You really going to call the FAA? What are you going to tell them? You're going to tell them the map's wrong? And plus, there's again that's that massive leap of faith, because they've got a whole list of things. Well, maybe I dozed off. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm confused. But it's not even on the list. It's so far below the list. It's on the floor, and that is no pilot is going to make the jump to flat Earth. They're never ever going to do it. And if they did, they'd be benched. They'd be fired immediately. It'd be worse than if they might as well literally have said, oh, by the way, a UFO was chasing us for the last 2 hours.
Right.
You'd be actually ridiculed less for that.
Yeah, actually, pilots are managing to keep their jobs nowadays by saying that.
Yeah.
At least more so than they have in the past.
Mm-hmm. So what else you want to...
So, okay, let's take this to, the what the hell does all this mean level.
Okay.
I mean, because, especially so many people nowadays, we're in what everybody's calling the great wake up, the ascension process, or whatever we want to term it, in whichever school you happen to be following.
Yeah.
There is a definite spiritual renaissance happening on the planet.
Agreed.
Where people are getting connected to themselves, getting connected to spirit, getting connected to, God.
Yep.
Within this, if we change a real, very fundamental assumption that we've made through, for at least the last 500 years about the environment that we're existing in, and that is brought into question.
Yeah.
That has a ripple effect through practically everything that we're experiencing here. I mean, when I first watched these clues, and at that point there were 10 the first time I watched it.
Yeah.
It actually really shook up my whole paradigm, and as far as the whole spiritual hierarchy and the stuff that I've been communicating with, the stuff that I'm able to tap into. Mm-hmm. And the big question that popped into my mind is, oh my God, well, these guys haven't told me that I'm not living on a globe. I mean, I suppose I never really asked that question. I've never said, hey, Michael, do I live on a globe, or is this a flat Earth? Which is something that I've been actually working on in my meditations here recently.
Sure.
But what's that do to the whole spiritual awakening happening on the planet?
It's an excellent point, which I tried to touch on in number 10 and 11. Because by the time I got there, I was not necessarily pulling away from number 5 where I went to status quo, because I initially had the same reaction to it as, I try to put myself in other people's shoes. And so when I was trying to put myself in the authorities' shoes, I immediately thought, well, if this happens, if this is revealed, and I absolutely agree with you, there's things in play here, this thing's getting traction for a reason. I do not know exactly why. It could be a disclosure part of it, it could be an awakening, but my initial reaction was that, it could be a knee-jerk snap kick from religion if they're led into this. From a spirituality standpoint, unfortunately, there's a tendency for payback, and that is, science has been beating us down for centuries, and now, all of a sudden it's like science will have to come forward and say, oh yeah, by the way, we've been it's been hidden from you by us for the last 6 decades. And deliberately, because we didn't want to let the spirituality aspect of people to come forward and to have this big shift towards religion. But by the time I got to number 10 and 11, I really was thinking, okay, if this is the case, if this is what we're meant, if this is to be part of a big disclosure process, maybe that will be tempered, because it's not just that the true nature of the world would be revealed, but also that we're not alone. And we never were alone. And for me, it wasn't just a comforting feeling. It was, oh, hey, by the way, there's been someone looking over your shoulder, making sure, just checking up on you. And once people realize that's real, and I hate to diminish it by using the Santa Claus argument, but I think it applies, and a lot of people can relate to it. And that is, the naughty and nice list doesn't really mean anything until you actually see Santa Claus standing in front of the fireplace. And then it does mean something, meaning people all of a sudden become accountable for their actions. And, all the malicious things that we've done to each other over the years, that comes into play. And it's like, again, it's one thing if you're ignorant and naive and you don't know. People have faith in God. Fantastic. Wonderful. But but nobody has a tangible, rock solid proof. You can't walk up to, no one's been able to walk up to, to a wall or a barrier with God's handprint on it. And if they know it's there, then people, in my opinion, become better. I think we become better as a civilization, as a society. Some people say, well, it's an aspect of Big Brother and it's oppressive. And it's like, no, it isn't. And which is why I gave the stoplight argument. And I say, okay, everyone's run a stoplight, but if there's a camera at that stoplight, you don't run it. And I say, why? Why don't you? And so, well, because I'll get caught. It's like, well, then why were you thinking about running it in the first place? It's wrong, but so why are you still running it? And, you can apply that to all sorts of things. It's like, really, are you going to gun somebody down the street? if you know that there may be a scorecard involved, that someone may be watching. Again, it's not even that you're being watched or you're being looked after or looked over. It's the possibility of it, because if it's an enclosed structure, if it's real, then the creation story becomes solidified. And if that's the case, we act better than we are now. So that was, by the time I got to number 11, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go all positive with this, and I'm not going to do the doom and gloom route, which so many people would do. They're saying, oh, it'll be the end of the world and people will destroy it and they'll burn the cities down. I'm going, no, that's not the case. If anything, it'll get real strange. I mean, you'll have pilgrimages to, I pronounced that wrong, to the ice. Churches will be built out in Antarctica. No question. The people, all these religious organizations will be asking permission of governments. It's like, look, can we, take a trip out to see it, ourselves? And again, it's spiritually, I think it'd be a fantastic, time to be alive.
Yeah.
So have you done any research into the hollow Earth theory?
Absolutely. In fact, I was a hollow Earth guy. Oh, geez, 10 years ago, maybe a little more, to the point where I even I took a girlfriend I was dating at the time out to Mount Shasta, and we went cave hunting, looking for the mysterious some of the entrances that were supposedly out near Mount Shasta. But as far as hollow Earth goes, it does not conflict with, and for those out there who are professing perfect plain flat Earth theory, the hollow Earth thing works a lot better if there's a bulge in the center near the North Pole, where Admiral Byrd, again, that's where I started with Admiral Byrd, because he's a legend for the hollow Earth community. If it's a bulge center, then that bulge has way more room than you would need for some sort of ancient civilization or an older version of us. To maintain a system. It doesn't have to be a giant, the Earth doesn't have to be completely hollow where you go and, it's 8,000 miles deep. A bulge would be, is bigger than most countries, and you could put a lot of people in there. So yeah, I'm totally into the hollow Earth thing. I totally dig it.
What do you think about the hollow Earth being the flip side to the coin?
Also like that too. Someone brought that up to me last week, and I also very possible. Again, I love not wasting resources when it comes to this. And from an enclosed standpoint, this model is so efficient that it would not surprise me at all if there was a flip side to it. Efficiencies, in the enclosed system we have, it's staggering to watch. To look at it from the azimuthal map, from a top-down point of view, where you have the continents organically clustered in the center, surrounded by a massive body of 3% solution salt water, which people think, that's just a natural process. No, 3% solution salt water is genius, because it means that ocean discovery voyages are limited by reduced by 95%, because you can't drink the water that you're sailing on. And then you reduce the temperatures to the outer barriers to the point you get around 15 degrees where icebergs start forming. And then if you make it past that, you've got a 2-mile high plateaued continent, which goes all the way around, and then there's probably a couple 100-mile buffer zone at least before you get to anything, before you get to the turnback signs of the barrier, and then the decreasing oxygen levels. That happens very, very quickly. You can get altitude sickness in under 2 miles. When you're going up. So there's mountains. We cannot climb to the top without oxygen. And, again, it's just a fascinating, efficient design. But to your point, yeah, I could absolutely see it to where this thing had a flip side of the coin. Sure.
Sure. Also, I'm thinking we're talking about the ocean currents.
Yeah.
So the ocean currents, as we see them now, what would be generating them? I mean, is there some type of system, deep in the trenches of the ocean that caused them to?
Oh, sure. I think of all the technology we have now. I mean, you're talking about the underwater conveyor system. From everything we can do now, I probably shouldn't diminish it by using something silly like the jets in a hot tub, but Imagine if you could scale up an underwater jet system that's, to incorporate ocean environment that was 8,000 miles wide, and to that effect, no different than the jet stream up above, which is 100, really just a giant air conditioning system that pumps out air, in a circular pattern running at, I don't know, between 100 and 200 miles an hour, in really one big circular motion. And if you take the conveyor system and put that on a flat map, it also goes circular. It's again, the design is fantastic. And it's something that we can, only now can get our heads around, because we can do similar things, not just in real life, but in the Hollywood world. We try to simulate this stuff all the time, although most of the time now it's done in CGI. But before that, we had to invent ways of creating big scale stuff, in a small environment. And I think only now can we even really explain it to ourselves, how, it makes more sense to us now.
As far as the whole weather, the currents and all that thing, I kind of like the just the heat model. I mean,
yeah.
that is, I don't remember if you put that out or.
No, I know who you're talking about. That's Matt Boylan.
I mean, you add heat to water and you start moving things.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. If you hadn't listened to his thing, his one great gem of an interview, where when the NASA guys explained it to him, when they dropped that bomb on his head, I can't even imagine being explained if I was 20-something years old that, oh, by the way, I know you're not into conspiracies, but the world's flat.
Right.
It's just amazing. I'm surprised he didn't drink himself into a coma. Was that they explained to him that the entire system was based off of temperature, and that everything really happened down below. It wasn't the sun generating a lot of heat. I mean, the sun generates heat, no different than a big light bulb, but everything else, all the mechanisms below were based off of temperature. And that made perfect sense between the geologic systems, the underwater conveyor system, and the jet stream up above. You could do, it's almost unlimited, the amount of combinations you can use. It's redundant systems that play off each other, and just wonderful stuff, at least until we start messing with it.
Right. Yeah. Let's
another
extra clouds up there for us.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I think we got at least enough out there for our audience to wet their whistle.
Cool.
And to, at least I think that anybody who takes a serious look at this with their mind open enough, like I said earlier, that their brains don't fall out, but it's open enough that they suspend their disbelief long enough to take a serious look at all the evidence that is out there, it will definitely raise some serious questions. And I, this whole idea of a flat Earth has, it's puts quite a few different puzzle pieces together for me. It's like, okay, well, now this thing over here that I really couldn't understand, it kind of makes sense within this model.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, the Nibiru stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. All those reflections or whatever they are, these photographs that people are taking, that kind of makes sense if I consider it within an enclosed environment.
Yeah. Find me, and I'm not kidding when I say this. Find me, anyone listening, a conspiracy that doesn't work better in an enclosed system than it does a globe. Everything you will look at, if you look close enough, it just fits better. And I have yet to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
So
definitely got to agree there. Well, Mark, I have a distinct feeling that we will be talking again.
Okay.
This is some good stuff, and man, thank you so much for putting the clues together. You did a fantastic job with those.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, good stuff. Cool. And as always, every time I delve into any of this type of material, my brain's going to be going for days again now. Oh, but I love it. I absolutely love it. This is good stuff.
Cool.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody out there for listening. You guys, before I cut this off, you guys got anything else you want to throw out there before you cut off?
No, my mind's on the floor right now.
Listen, thank you for all the information you're putting out, and Yeah, like Tom said, a lot of puzzle pieces get put together with this, but also a lot of puzzle pieces get taken apart.
Yeah, indeed. But I like I try to tell people, it's like, don't let your brain melt, and one day at a time. And with any luck, this thing will hit some sort of critical mass, and maybe we'll get to see it for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I got to figure out a way to see it, some way.
I hear you. Man.
Well, thank you.
Hey, no, thank you guys.
All right. Namaste, my friends, and we will see you guys in the next show. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. Ta-da!
Cool. Are we out?
All right, yeah, that's a